And now, marine weather around Alaska.
And starting off marine segment with tonight's weather, actually ice edge. Here we've got really reduced ice. Has been the case the last couple of days here along the southwest coast from what it was last week, but still some pretty heavy ice, although the whole mess has retreated northward here, but still some good ice around St. Lawrence Island, and almost going back to very little ice in Bristol Bay there. And for tonight, we've got windy conditions continuing here from the central interior, especially the higher elevations like Indian Mountain, up through the passes of the Brooks Range. That's where the strongest winds gusts will occur again tonight, and blizzard warnings continue for the Arctic coast. This low brings a chance of snow into areas east and south of the Alaska Range, maybe even in the Copper River Basin. Heaviest snowfall, North Gulf Coast, over to about Yakutat, tapering off there, with most of the moisture staying out of the southeast coast, but that front coming closer, and tomorrow may bring some light precipitation into all the coastal areas of the Panhandle, with snow for the North Gulf Coast and areas of the Copper River Basin up to the southern slopes of the western Alaska Range. Chance of snow with this low center pulling into the Kenai Peninsula. So that creates a chance of snow for the peninsula there up into all of south central Alaska. Scattered light snow showers and a lot of clouds here in the central interior, especially the Kobuk, Koyukuk Valley out to around the Seward Peninsula. Dry to the north, very dry, light winds to the south. Weak front out there to the west, and then this stronger system we'll see on Saturday pulls northward here and starts to stream moisture back up to the Prince William Sound area, southern Kenai Peninsula. Looks like rain moving into Kodiak Island, especially in the afternoon. Increasing winds there for the southern and southeast coast, and pretty windy conditions across all the Panhandle there due to the gradient between the high over the Northwest Territories and the low there southwest of the Queen Charlotte Islands. And we got 25 knot east winds in the forecast for Friday there for the south coast of the Panhandle, with gusts up to 40 knots there. On the extreme south coast, up to the north, gale warnings. East winds 35 to 40 knots. Small craft advisories, Lynn Canal, Stevens Passage, north at 25 to 30 knots. Southeast at 15 for Clarence Strait. And then for the day Saturday, for Prince of Wales Island, gale warnings. East winds 35, gusting 50 knots. Northeast 25 for Stevens Passage. Small craft advisories, for Clarence Strait, northeast 25. Stevens Passage, Lynn Canal, north at 25. And for the north coast here, central north coast, east winds 20 to 30 knots with higher gusts. Prince William Sound tomorrow, southeast at 30, sea 7 feet. Eastern North Gulf Coast on the extreme east side there, southeast 35, otherwise diminishing to 10 or to 20 knots here for the central North Gulf Coast. West side variable winds at 10 knots. And that extends into the Barren Islands, and then north winds 20 knots, southern Cook Inlet and Kamishak Bay. And then we're looking at gale warnings for those areas, southern Cook Inlet, Kamishak Bay on Saturday for 35 knot winds from the north and northeast, north 20, northern Cook Inlet, east winds 30 knots, Prince William Sound, sea 7 feet, east winds 30 knots for the Barren Islands, and much of the North Gulf Coast up to 35 knots farther to the east. Kodiak Island, variable winds tomorrow at 10 knots, seas down to 2 to 3 feet or 2 to 5 feet, northeast at 10 for Bristol Bay, and winds mostly north to northeast at 15 knots for the Alaska Peninsula. And for Saturday, the peninsula here, looking at north to northeast winds, 15 to 20 knots, northeast at 20 for Bristol Bay, and Kodiak Island, northeast winds, 30 to 35 knots. Eastern Aleutians tomorrow, variable winds 10 to 15 knots, about the same for Adak and Atka, light variable winds there. And then for the western Aleutians, you see a big increase in the winds, gale force winds from Kiska to Shemya, out of the southeast at 35 to 45 knots. Those are much lighter on Saturday as that front really weakens, looking at south to southwest winds 15 to 25 knots there. Adak and Atka, southeast at 30. And for the eastern Aleutians, east-southeast winds 20 to 25 knots. And for the southwest coast, for the Yukon Delta coast, north at 15, north 20, northeast 20 for the Kuskokwim Delta coast. St. Paul, St. George, light variable winds with 4-foot seas, northeast at 30 for St. Matthew Island, northeast 25, Norton Sound, and north at 20 for St. Lawrence Island. Then really light winds here, St. Lawrence Island and Norton Sound, variable at 5 knots. Northeast at 10 for the Yukon Delta coast, northeast 20 for the Kuskokwim Delta coast, east at 20 for the Pribilofs, and east 25 for St. Matthew Island. Gale warnings for the eastern Beaufort Sea coast tomorrow. East winds 35 knots, about 30 knots there for the central coast, northeast 30. For the western Arctic coast and the Chukchi Sea, northeast winds 20 to 40 knots. And then for the day on Saturday, for the eastern Beaufort Sea coastline, still east here, 30 to 35 knots, about the same on the central coast. Brisk wind advisories, western Arctic coast, east at 25. Much lighter and more variable winds here for the Chukchi Sea, running about 10 to 20 knots from the east to north.